And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Monday, October 21st, 2024. And starting out on this Monday morning, mid-late morning period, because this outlook is for Tuesday and Wednesday. As of this Monday late morning, we have a very deep and powerful low over eastern Russia. It's down below 960 millibars in the mid 950s, around 954 millibars. And it has this large arcing, all-encompassing front out ahead of it that's pushing eastward. And this system is just, the circulation is very large, similar to the low we had over a week ago that was sitting down in this position. But this one is farther north, and it's in a bad spot because what it does is force long fetch west-southwest winds right up into areas of the west coast, especially Norton Sound. We have various coastal flood warnings and flood advisories. Some of the forecast water heights here along eastern Norton Sound could be close to what they were with Merbach, even though the winds may not be as high as what they were with Merbach. This long fetch west-southwest flow will be pushing that water into Norton Sound, running anywhere from 8 to as much as 12 to 13 feet above the normal high tide. All that moisture coming inland in the form of rain and snow. We have various winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories. We have high wind warnings down here along the west coast through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. So a lot of multiple weather hazards anticipated, and the system is just going to slowly kind of make a loop down here around Cape Lisburne up to Point Lay and then to Utqiagvik. And as it does that little dip, it's just forcing, the front already will be well inland, and we're just having a broad west-southwest flow across much of the western side of the state, pushing into the interior. IFR conditions widespread Tuesday morning. Areas of Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula, Brooks Range, areas of heavy snow, blowing snow there, snow pushing all the way inland through the eastern interior, Alcan border. We also have secondary development, a low not that strong, that'll take shape east of the Kenai between Hinchinbrook Entrance, Kayak Island, as the front works its way northeastward. So IFR conditions there along the northern Gulf. And for Tuesday, we continue to see IFR conditions there along the Brooks Range and middle upper Yukon River. The Alaska Range is another area seeing nasty early season winter storm conditions, and then also back and then spreading eastward into the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, Yakutat. We expect low ceilings, visibilities in precipitation, rain and snow, of course snow mid-higher elevations. And then for Wednesday morning, we find IFR conditions along the Arctic coast, especially say from around Point Lay eastward to Kaktovik. We find IFR conditions here, inner coastal mountains of the Panhandle, northern Panhandle, Yakutat area, back toward the Copper River Basin. Widespread IFR out off along the southwest coast, off of Kuskokwim Bay, westward through the Pribilov Islands, all the way out, especially on the north side of the Aleutians and across the lower Bering. And then for Wednesday afternoon, we find still lingering areas of IFR conditions here, intercoastal mountains up against British Columbia there in the Panhandle, MVFR elsewhere, MVFR conditions along north the Alaska Range with IFR continuing Utqiagvik eastward through Kaktovik, and then a broad area of IFR conditions southwest mainland, Bristol Bay, and especially north side of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern half of the Aleutians there through the lower Bering Sea. So conditions for the passes, not good up there along the Brooks Range. IFR, low, very low IFR because we have winter storm conditions rolling through there, continuing on Tuesday into early Wednesday. Adigan Pass IFR. As we drop down along the west arm of the Alaska Range, IFR at Lake Clark and Merrill. Rounding up, rainy, windy pass eastward through Isabel and Mentasta passes, all IFR conditions expected there on Tuesday. And then Tanita Pass, IFR early Tuesday, giving way to MVFR conditions. And Portage Pass also IFR expected there through a good portion of the pass on Tuesday morning, becoming MVFR. And in the far north end of the Panhandle, initially VFR early on Tuesday, giving way though to IFR conditions as that frontal system pushes in with the lower ceilings, visibilities, and precipitation. So here we have the low sitting up here. It's going to kind of loop down, kind of run right along the northwest Arctic coast there, the Chukchi Sea coastline. Big front arcing ahead of it. Ahead of the front, we have a push of warmer air. That's why the freezing levels come up aloft here into the Northwest Territories, Yukon, down across the Gulf. And then back to the west, we see the colder air over much of the Bering Sea, where freezing levels aloft are below 2,000 feet, surface freezing line. We do have, as I said, a long west-southwest flow or fetch coming in off the Bering. That air is somewhat moderated, so that's why we don't see freezing temperatures here along the coast or even inland, because all that milder, moist air has been forced inland behind the occluded front. And then here is that tongue of warmer air aloft, creeping upwards into the Gulf, just off of the Panhandle coast, 4, 6, even 8,000 feet in the lower Gulf. So where there are areas of precipitation, we expect potential for moderate icing along areas of the Brooks Range, the Chukchi Sea coast, Seward Peninsula coastline, Norton Sound, down through the lower Yukon. Also areas of the Alaska Range, western Alaska Range above 3,000 and 4,000 feet. Along the Gulf Coast, we have the other front trying to push in above 6,000 feet there. And then back to the west, there's an area above 6,000 feet to the north of the western Aleutians out there, way out in the western part of the Bering Sea. Broad low-pressure trough in the upper atmosphere, 30,000 feet jet stream level. You can see the core of the jet stream. This is a very pronounced jet core, over 100 knots with peak winds in the upwards of 120 just south of the Gulf, and then coming inland there across the northern Panhandle into northwest Canada up to 130 knot southwesterly flow. Bring it down to 9,000 feet, 700 millibars. We have, again, a continuation of a very broad area of winds, 50 to locally as high as 60, 70 knots, especially here in northwest Canada. But coming across the mainland, we find numerous winds at 9,000 feet, 700 millibars there in the Alaska Range, in excess of 50 to 60 knots, and then back out across the Aleutians and lower portion of the Bering Sea and the Alaska Peninsula. And as we take it down to 3,000 feet above the surface, we have low circulation up here that will be north of the Arctic coast, but a broad belt of winds coming in across the west side of the state into the southwest interior, into the western Gulf, the Alaska Peninsula. A broad area of winds, 40 plus knots, locally upwards of 50 knots. There will be some areas, like in the case here, just east end of Kotzebue Sound. And where do we expect to find some of the greatest turbulence? Well, widespread moderate turbulence throughout essentially much of the mainland and pushing into the central interior. We could find some areas of isolated severe turbulence along and west of the Alaska Range, surface to 6,000, surface to 8,000 feet, but a broad area of moderate turbulence. Brooks Range, surface to 4,000 feet, falls down there, surface to 3,000 feet from St. Lawrence down through St. Matthew, the Pribilovs, and then across the Aleutian chain up into the Alaska Peninsula. Look for moderate turbulence, 3,000 to 4,000 feet from the surface upward. And then also an area of about 6,000, surface to 6,000 feet will exist some moderate turbulence there in through areas of the northern Panhandle on Tuesday. So definitely many places you're not going to be able to get out of and just hunker down, because this is a widespread early season significant winter storm impacting much of the state. Play it safe and keep an eye on the latest conditions and forecasts. Thank you.